when your investment is in tune with your thoughts, that's when you are on the right path. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen very often that you really, literally think ahead of what's going to happen, which is in many ways a good sign. In particular, it's a good sign when it's one of those things that, in hindsight, is almost straightforward, like duh. I mean, what else did you expect? But of course, in hindsight, everything is like that. And there's a fine line in investing between, having things happen that you expect and having things happen that you expect. It's a fine line between the situation that looks good and then turns out not to be that good and the one that is really good. And I'm going to talk about the examples in our recent past. The purpose of this podcast series is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So this is a great example. Now, I can use the example of NVIDIA and Tesla and generative AI, and in particular, a recent presentation by the CVPR, which is Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference in Vancouver, where Tesla's director of AI gave a presentation. And it was a very interesting presentation. But the one thing he did, Ashok is his name, he actually presented something that I was talking about for at least since the GPT moment, but even before, which is how can we generate animations from neural nets? In other words, how can we learn to generate animations without explicit programming? And if we could do that, we can do a lot of things. One thing we can do is we can create animations and have the cars learn how to drive based on those animations, based on real world animations. This is the difference. I'm going to explain what that means. Second, we could use generated video as a cross-check of ground truth with what we actually see and have the car start making decisions based on that. So in a sense, we can generate the next couple of seconds of driving and then see what we actually see. And as long as we overlap with what we see, we know we're not in an edge case scenario. And as soon as we are in something more interesting, then maybe the car has to either go into some special, mode, maybe even the driver has to take over. Or it's a way to manage the immediate future of the car that could be managed by generative AI. I'm going to explain what that means in more detail. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's July 29, 2023. This is Krimdelko. Since the last update, we're down 7.5%. The market's up 0.5%. For the year, we are up 118.5%. The market is up 114%. We're outperforming by 104.5%. So Ashok gave a presentation at CVPR in Vancouver last week, and some of the slides and presentations leaked on YouTube. I wasn't there, unfortunately, but that's not the point. Well, that's actually also a little bit concerning, but I don't want to talk about this right now because I should have been there. I wasn't. Nevertheless, Ashok gave a presentation and he spoke about the power of generative AI, of end-to-end neural nets in full self-driving. And what that means is that we have the computer vision part and the pattern recognition part and the localization part and the mapping part are fully learned neural nets, no explicit programming. But the planning was still relatively explicitly programmed. That part needs to be taken over, and Musk said that many times. It has to be also fully neural nets. In other words, it has to be fully non-explicit programming, full non-explicit programming. Now, how do you get there? There's different paths, and since the GPT moment, one of the paths that we could see is generative AI. I think generative AI has many huge applications in robotics. And when I say robotics, I mean robotics within the context of full self-drive. To me, that is almost a synonym at this point. Okay, so robotics and full self-drive are the same thing. The car is nothing but a robot that drives itself, of course, and there's a couple of things that maybe a humanoid robot has to do differently than a car, but that's not for this podcast. So the car is the robot, robotics is full self-drive. It's all the same in this particular episode. So when we talk about robotics, we have the problem of planning. So once we see what's going on around us, and once we have a sense for what the situation is. And of course, we have, let's say, a direction, a map where we want to go. Then the car has to start making decisions what to do. Should I turn left? Should I turn right? Should I, cross here or there? Those are the kinds of decisions the planning takes care of. And the fundamental problem of planning is that so far it has been relatively explicitly, in other words, a lot of the planning has been, okay, if this happens, do that. If you see this, do that, sort of thing. Lots and lots of explicit programming, lots of lines of C++ and all that stuff, C++ and all that stuff. What Tesla's trying to do is replace all of that with neural nets, learn everything from scratch. And I think one of the applications that I've been very curious about was actually animation. And what do I mean with animation? Animation is when we take the real world and then we run many virtual examples based on the real world. So the car can learn from behavioral cloning, for example. So that it's a very straightforward idea, right? You have a road in Alaska with ice and snow, and then you generate 1 billion versions of that road. In other words, you generate a tree of potential outcomes that could be part of that road. It could rain, there could be a reindeer on the road, there could be sunshine and the whole thing can melt right away. The point is it's generated through a prompt, very similar to GPT. And it generates only the first, let's say, 30 seconds of the road. So we're t plus 0 today to right now, and we just go forward, t plus 30 seconds, right? All we do is generate those first 30 seconds. That's it. And based on that generation, we have a representation of reality which is animated, and we can run 1 billion versions of that. If we have enough compute, we can do 1 trillion. It doesn't matter. The point is that we can do what no real world, and nobody, even Tesla, cannot do, which is we can't run this particular stretch in Paris, let's say, this particular road next to the boulangerie, just in front of the restaurant, next to a door, and then have 1 billion versions of this. It rains, there's a thunderstorm, there's one of the bakeries explodes, and there's some whatever edge cases, edge case here, edge case there. I hope it's clear where I'm going here. The point is, and that's very important, that we have a way now to generate examples which are based in the real world. This is what Ashok was talking about. He wasn't exactly talking about the conclusion here. In other words, the application. What is Tesla actually doing with this tech? He wasn't talking about that. He mentioned something about it's not in production yet, we won't see it yet, things along those lines. But that's not the important part. What's important here is that they're talking about something that we've been talking about, Orange Capital Partners, I would say 2 years ago. It started with how can we build animations that are built on foundation models of the real world. We didn't even talk about GPT and those sort of things. We were just talking about general neural nets that can be taught what the real world could be looking like. And now we know how this could be looking like. You take a video and you start projecting the next 30 seconds to generative AI. This is all there is. So one application, again, is animation. The other application, again, Ashok wasn't talking about it, but we conjecture that this is a possibility, would be to use the representation of the next 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, doesn't matter, of the road in front of you, generate a potential, like generate the most likely scenario, and then compare what you actually see. And as long as the scenario and what you see match, you keep driving. And as soon as it doesn't match, you go into emergency mode. In other words, that's when we're having, that would be the definition of an edge case. So now we have a different way to capture what edge cases are. We have a definition of an edge case. The edge case is simply when the reality doesn't match the generated picture. And t plus 5, 10, 20 seconds, that is something that the model has to learn, of course, what's the optimal time. The point is you don't need a lot, because in generative AI, particularly in linear robotic applications, of course, after a while, let's say t plus 50 seconds, the reality will look very different than what the actual reality is. But t plus 5 seconds, it will look very close to what the reality is. You can use this as a learning prompt to improve the model, but you can also use this as a signal for an edge case, and then go from there and work with the edge cases, load them up, learn from it, or just simply tell the driver to take over. I don't know exactly what the application of that could be, but of course, having a better, more scientific, more computationally intensive way to define edge cases, in my opinion, is a very powerful tool that Tesla has at its disposal as we speak. So those are the two things that came to my mind right away when I saw this presentation. And I can't emphasize enough how exciting this is, because Tesla is an AI company. AI is at the core of Tesla. Tesla is catching a bid from the GPT bubble that is forming. I would say right now the bid is sort of an associated bid. Well, we're buying NVIDIA, we're buying Synopsys, we're buying Snowflake, and we're buying whatever else is out there. But Tesla is different. Tesla is not just an associated AI company. They will be able to use these modern tools of AI and actually introduce new technologies, new products and services based on those tools that have direct effect on consumers, that have direct commercial applications. This is when wealth is generated. We are long Tesla. So this is an example of an event that we've been talking about, predicting, and that it's actually happening. And I just want to use an example where that has happened, and unfortunately, it hasn't panned out. And that is our CRISPR index. We were in a similar realm here, in a sense. We were talking about the potential for CRISPR technology to be a cure for diseases and things like that. And then we had, about 3 years ago, a breakthrough. Intellia had an in vivo success in an FDA-approved, FDA trial. The stock went up 2x, 3x. But then it just couldn't materialize. And I think the difference is that in the case of Tesla and generative AI, this is a real product with real applications, with real traction. And in the case of Intellia, unfortunately, it was a flash in the pan. They couldn't execute, build on it, improve on it. The results that came in, they were not as good, and so on and so forth. Now, as a hedge fund manager, of course, it's very difficult to capture the difference. And hindsight is 2020. It's easy to say in hindsight, well, because we didn't sell Intellia back then. We didn't actually make an effort and get out and all those things. But it's still useful to learn from these cases. It's useful to learn from these cases. So when you have a situation where a stock is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and a company is doing things that you anticipate it will be doing, then that is, and you combine that with the potential that is almost, obvious is a strong word, but it's certainly available. You can see it, you can feel it. When you see all those things come together, you are in a situation that I would say is a very strong indication of wealth creation ahead of you. When you are in a situation where you predicted something and it happens, but then the traction takes its time and management doesn't communicate as clearly as it is right now with Tesla, for example, then you have a sense for a flash in the pan. It doesn't mean it's a sell, it doesn't mean it's a short, none of those things. But it is a red signal. So again, from the perspective of an investor that is very highly concentrated and looks for wealth creation through the application of new fundamental concepts and engineering practices, what you want to see is that those fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices actually get applied. And that's exactly what we're seeing now with Tesla. This is a very, very exciting moment in our journey, a very exciting moment also for this podcast series, whose goal is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. Well, there's nothing more direct, nothing more powerful than to have a signal like this. I can't emphasize enough. The signal that Tesla is sending, particularly to Russia, is incredibly strong. Can they execute? There's still a lot of risk here. As always with Tesla, execution risk is almost the only risk. But it doesn't matter. That's a whole different conversation. And it's a conversation we don't necessarily have to have right now. I think what we want to focus on is simply that we have been predicting a certain, course of events, a certain outcome, and that is exactly what's happening right now. And that's what's so great. Thank you.